Thanks a lot for being here this evening. My name is Kevin Conover, and you're listening to K-Praise 1210 AM down in Southern California. We're also on FM 106.1 every Saturday. We air right around the afternoon, and we're also, of course, broadcast all over the world on YouTube, on podcast, on all the different platforms. So you can check us out there. And we're going to be talking to a gentleman who changed his mind about the reality of a flood. His name is Dr. Ron Neller. He holds a BA and a PhD in what's called fluvial geomorphology. That's a mouthful right there. He has held lecturing and research positions at the University of New England in Australia, Griffith University, the University of Sunshine Coast in Queensland, University of Queensland, also in Finland, and the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's published over 35 research papers in international academic journals, with many more papers delivered to international conferences, and he's also established and directed university research institutes. Dr. Neller, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. I always love to hear how somebody changed their mind, because it's always interesting to me when a person has something where it takes them from one place and completely puts them into a new place. So give us a little bit of background. Where were you originally before you decided that there was actually a biblical flood?
Good question, Kevin, because I grew up in a non-Christian home. If you like the correct terminology, I was on the wrong side of the tracks, both from a Christian point of view and a social economic point of view. In other words, there was a lot of alcoholism within the extended family, and a lot of abuse went on as well. And it wasn't just within the family. I became a victim of, let's say, abuse at school, which we don't need to talk about. But what that did was create in me a very strong defensive, almost anti-godly attitude. Because if you have numerous males saying they love you and treating you in a certain way, when somebody else comes along and says, you know, there is a father who loves you, your reaction is quite strong, negative. And so I started off in life very almost atheistic, certainly. And that was throughout my primary, high school, and university as well. So I rarely came across a Christian in all of my upbringing in that particular area. And so then the question is often asked, well, why did I go into research and academia? Well, I actually did. It's an escape model, Kevin. I was, unlike the others, wanting to spend time at the courtesy of the government in various institutions.
Yeah.
So, as some members of the extended family thought was the good way to go, I thought, no, I'm going to
free room and board, right? Free room and board.
That's right. You got free room and board. So I decided, no, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to get an education. I'm going to free myself of all of this, and set myself on a track. So I didn't even qualify to go to university, but just a little side thing there. I did rock up at the local university and beg to be let in. And they said, why? You don't qualify. Well, I didn't qualify because of the education system I was in, which was an abusive one at the time, and was eventually closed down, by the way, by the government when they realized what was happening. But I did meet one old gentleman who said, why are you here? Because the security had alerted him that there was a strange student wandering around campus. And I told him my story, and he turned out to be the chaplain. And he allowed me to enter the university under Act so-and-so. And so I began my studies.
Wow.
Not doing too well to start with because of my background, but very quickly rising the ranks and then becoming top student, because I was determined to change my life. And what I was trying to do, of course, is exactly what God helps us to do. But without God, I was trying to redefine my life. I was trying to find out, who am I? What is my purpose in life? Which is what everybody asks for. And I was driven aggressively to pursue that. So once I'd finished my bachelor's degree, I thought I'd do a master's, and they said, no, you're going straight on to a PhD. And I got that, and I thought, okay, I took off overseas, partly because I didn't want to be in the country. I didn't want to be around the family and the rest of it. I came back years later when I had established myself as a professor in numerous countries, recognized, and I felt I could come back home in a sense.
Dr. Neller, Dr. Neller, as you're getting older and you're seeing, you said you were kind of anti-God and you really weren't familiar with any Christians. Was there any point that in that process where you considered God at all?
There
What
were
was going on there?
opportunities. Yeah, there
Yeah.
were opportunities. There was a young gentleman when I was in high school who could see, he was another high school student at a different school. I think it was a Christian school. He could see the struggling I was going through. And so he became a friend when you really didn't have many friends. And so that touched me. And I think then you come across other Christians as well, which I did in my journey around the world. Um, and even when I was in Finland working there, a Finnish pastor became a good friend. Again, they realized I was struggling. And so I guess what they illustrated to me was that Christians were a different type of people. They were not like a classic aggressive. They were actually very patient, very comforting, didn't tell me what to do, just simply were there when I needed help.
So
And
another question, Dr. Neller, because your expertise,
mm,
undergraduate, it looks like, and also graduate degrees have to do with geology that pertains to water. Is that correct?
yeah, essentially earth science. So I'm not really like a geologist who stick their head underground. I actually looked at the surface more. And my basic question that I was asking is, how do floods create the current landscape that we see outside today? And I was thinking that was a many events occurring would create that landscape. So
Now,
essentially, it's surface
did
processes.
were you already aware of the flood story in the Bible? What motivated you to choose that focus when you were not even a Christian at that point? Is that correct?
That's correct. But before I answer that, a couple of things did happen to me that were rather interesting from an educational point of view.
Hmm.
Uh, in the first instance, when I was at university, I was told not to accept the current paradigms, which are sort of philosophical ways of looking at patterns,
Hmm.
mainly because my supervisor in my first thesis was being heavily criticized for an idea that took many, many years to be accepted as the correct answer. And so he alerted me right up to keep an open and exploratory mind. So I was sort of looking outside the paradigms that I had been taught as I traveled the world. I guess I was also taught in those days that the turnover of knowledge, its so-called half-life, which was coined in about 1962, is that 50% of what we know will be passed away in this number of years. And say it's 5 years, I came to the conclusion, well, within 5 years, 50% of what I've learned is incorrect. So why would I accept these paradigms, these ways of thinking? Why would I even accept my own research necessarily, unless there was something that was more, you know, could stand the test of time?
Oh, that's
And I think that's the
interesting.
point. Yeah, that they were very, very good pieces of information taught to me at university. Now, they're not taught today. I would argue that in most universities, you won't see that.
They're not
They,
taught. You mean they're not open-minded. They're more closed-minded.
they're more closed-minded, particularly when you look at research. They want you to stay within the current paradigm, not to
Mm.
explore outside of that. As one editor of a journal said to me once, why would I accept a different idea that challenged my idea when I've been working on it for 30 years? I'm not certainly not going to publish that in my journal.
Mm. Yeah, and that's a sad state of affairs right there.
It
Science is
is.
supposed to be the consistent process of reevaluating and coming to better conclusions, as we get more information, but that seems to be pretty stifled.
It's across academia, I'm afraid, not just
Hmm.
scientists. Um, and so, and finally, of course, I traveled the world. So I was seeing, rather interestingly, I'd meet many people studying the same landform feature. And I remember in one case, I looked at 9 different cases. The 9 different researchers came up with 9 different ideas based on their own limited
Wow.
experience, which is understandable because they're working in one environment, they're not comparing environments. But having gone between 9 different environments, I saw a commonality there because I was looking outside the paradigms. And I began to see connectivity on a global scale of a lot of Earth surface features. And that really started to change me. Well, if there's a commonality across the world with so many features, whether they be what I would call misfit rivers or fossil formation, all sorts of things that just didn't fit properly and yet there's a pattern across the world. Didn't this sort of suggest that there was a common cause?
Hmm. What is a misfit river?
Oh, that's an interesting one. It's a better term would be underfit river. And underfit river means that the river doesn't look as though it belongs in that valley. It looks too small, as though the
Uh-oh.
valley was created by something bigger. And my very first piece of research and publication was actually on one of those types of underfit rivers. It's got a special characteristic which you'll love. Its title is called the Osage Underfit River because it's named after the Osage River that commences in Kansas and flows through Missouri and so on. It is an underfit river. But as I studied that in my original research, I noticed they were all along the east coast of Australia, not just in the Osage Valley or in that one valley I was in. In fact, another chap, George Jury, identified that 50% of rivers, who's a top professor around the world, 50% of rivers in France are all underfit. They're the
Wow.
wrong. And so
Wow, that is amazing.
that's amazing. And that said to me that something else of a larger volume of water created these valleys. And today, all we see are these little streams that occupy them. They never created them, they simply occupy them.
Well, this is the same with the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah,
Oh,
we have
wow,
the same here
that's
in
amazing.
Australia with Katoomba, the gorges there, beautiful gorges like yours are. I must admit, when I went to yours and had a look, I was a bit terrified on the stairwell, to be honest.
Yeah. Rightfully so.
It looked slightly rusted.
Yeah. They've run out of money to take care of the national parks. So
Yeah, so
well, that's really interesting. I had no idea. I mean, I teach my kids, we talk about that, how the widest point of the Colorado River that the research I've done is somewhere between 300 and 500 feet. And yet the widest part of the canyon is 18 miles wide. And
mm,
it's absolutely silly to think that the Colorado River carved this massive canyon, but I had no idea that this was something that occurred all throughout the world.
yes, it may not have a canyon look about it, but the valley that was created certainly is bigger than what the river looks to be.
Hmm.
Uh, So as I lived along the East Coast, I began looking everywhere as I drove up and down the East Coast of Australia. And I was stunned at how many of them are underfit. And George Jury, who was studying in Australia for a short time from the UK, said the same thing. He was caught off guard.
And
When
this
you
is
move into
well
South
known.
Australia, yeah,
This is well known among scientists who study things like earth science and geology. Is that right?
that's correct. The underfit rivers have been studied for over 100 years. The Osage was one of the first identified for over 100 years, but nobody can come to a conclusion as to how these occurred all around the world. They try to invoke climate change, that in the past there was a much wetter period, except that they can't generate enough runoff that would create those rivers. Those valleys would actually require the runoff, the stream flow or the flood flow, to increase 50 to 60 times. Now, we just don't see that in nature.
Hmm.
Uh, I think you'd suffocate standing in that rainfall. You'd
Yeah.
drown standing there. Now, that's not physically possible. So,
Wow.
so what's happened that particularly the underfit rivers has gone very, very quiet these days because you can't explain them. So,
So as you're studying this and then you're recognizing these sorts of features, what happened next for you?
well, I started to I started to accept there is a God. Um, and I made that comment after I'd come back from overseas, by the way. I now felt quite confident. I still felt somewhat empty. I was now a professor. I was now reasonably well off, having worked in foreign countries, and on those salaries was extremely good. But something was still missing. But I felt there must be a God because all the evidence now that I'd been studying in many other topics as well. I didn't just stay confined to those topics. I even looked at microbiology and archaeology and all. They all indicated a common unifying or connector, if you like, and of a global catastrophe. So
So
having
how long was that process from the time you began to see these features until you finally decided, you know what? When did you start bumping into the idea of a global flood along your way? Because you were in
yes,
Hong Kong, you said for
yes,
part of your time too.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, how did that all happen?
Well, even in Hong Kong, I met Christians as well who were trying to just being wonderful to me and looking after me. Um, I guess it took a long time because of my earlier upbringing. There was a resistance. So even though the scientific evidence came up quite strong, I was still quite hesitant. Now, I did begin to argue, let's say, having coffee with other researchers, looking at a particular case study, that maybe there is this possibility. But I was also warned, by the way, by my secular friends, don't go open with this, Ron. Do not comment on this.
Yeah.
You'll lose your position in a university. You can't do this. Interestingly, some of my friends who are secular scientists said, look, we agree with you, Ron. There must have been a global catastrophe, something like the Great Flood, because that's what the evidence of those who travel around the world see. But they said, we're not going to say it. We don't want to ruin our careers. So
Wow,
it took
that
me,
is disheartening.
it is, it took me then over 30 years to reach a
Yeah.
point when I was prepared to go public and made a statement at my last university that I believe God exists. Now, did that get me into some interesting challenges within the institution? Yes. If you are a research director and professor in science and you say God exists, that's not always comfortable in those faculties. And so I was challenged. One interesting feature here, Kevin, I laugh at this. An academic is so keen to put their name on a paper that they will publish, but they would not put their name on the little notes they would write and stick on my door, criticizing me for believing that God existed.
Yeah, that's funny.
They failed to recognize that I could tell their handwriting.
That's interesting.
But there
So
was a
what
lot of addition to that.
so what were they saying to you when you brought this up? What was their criticism? Because it seems like, there's quite a few scientists who either, they've made people aware that they believe in God, or they're closet Christians or closet,
Mm,
theists.
mm.
What were they saying to you?
Well, each institution is different, Kevin, because some of the older ones will certainly have a tolerance of that sort of. They'll still even have an evangelical school still attached to them. But many of the new ones, particularly in countries like Australia, are quite resistant to Christian thinking. So you might go to the open week, as we call it, the orientation week on campus, and you'll see stalls for everybody else, but the Christians won't be allowed a stall uh, to connect with Christian students coming into the institution. Those sort of things happen here. Um, so the comments were essentially mocking comments,
Hmm.
um, jokes, all sorts of things like that. Um,
Is this because people are ignorant of the evidence, or is it because what is it? Because it's interesting that this we're having this discussion, because I just recently have been in email communication with a professor at a university, and I said that I thought it would be worthwhile to have a scientific debate over the evidence for a young universe. And this person said there is no scientific support for that. What do you mean? And I wrote back, well, you need to be more informed. There's actually quite a bit of evidence for this. And I actually forwarded one of your articles from your website, creation.com, that lists some of the evidences for a recent creation. And I rattled off a bunch of PhD scientists and said, hey, you should probably update yourself. You need to be aware of this. This is real stuff. And so I just is it just lack of the information getting out to these people, or what's going on?
I I personally feel in most cases it is simply the lack of information. It's not a deliberate attempt. It's
Hmm.
simply because they were embedded in a system, a set of thinking, paradigms, ways of thinking, theories, all the rest of it from the day they were born, and very much reinforced at a university. Um, and so to survive in a university, well, I think they've already accepted that as their faith. That's their
Yes.
faith. I'm not really
Yes.
challenging them so much. I think they just need to open up and have a look at the articles, which they do resist quite strongly. And I'm similar to yourself. Um, universities won't invite me back in to speak, even if there's we offer a debate. We're not permitted back in again. So I mean, part of it, yes, there's an anti-Christian view, But I think in the majority of academics, it's simply an ignorance
Hmm.
based on their upbringing.
Now, when you were, when you were making this progression to where you finally were convinced of the historical record in the Bible, um, did you believe in evolution? Did you follow evolutionary thinking prior to that and uniformitarianism as far as, the explanation for why the world is the way it is?
Uh, Not really, Kevin. Even from day one, I just felt it was not correct. I guess because I've been taught to challenge paradigms, and it doesn't take much to challenge that one.
Yeah.
And so, even when I became an academic, if I had a Christian student who said they can't, no, sorry, go back a step, I did have to teach that from a, let's say, an Earth processes point of view, that the Earth evolved over time, which is not a correct term, but it changed over time. But if a student said they were Christian and couldn't answer those questions, I was quite happy to change those questions to, say, a modern day processes question. So I was quite lenient with Christian students in the universities I was in.
Hmm.
But no, I really didn't have that belief in evolution because from the earliest stages, being taught to challenge ideas, I challenged it and very quickly dismissed it.
Gotcha. Okay. So you were like, nah, this doesn't work.
No, no. Um, and by the way, when I traveled, this is rather humorous, when I traveled around the world, I did occasionally go to churches. And it was for the wrong reason, Kevin.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
if let's say if I did win a contract to do some consultancy work in the Cook Islands, and I quickly found out that at a ministers' meeting in the Cook Islands, they all prayed, and I was like, "What is going on here? This is a government ministers' meeting," and I said, "You prayed? Oh yes, I'm not only minister of this, I'm also the pastor of this church." And I was like, "Okay, well, if I want to keep my contract, I better pretend."
Oh.
And so I went along to various churches wherever I went, if the people surrounding me were Christians, which is rather interesting. So the seed was planted. And if I had friends in my life who were Christians and they wanted me to go, yeah, look, I'd go along,
So
within family.
you were like a agnostic almost more than you were
Yes,
an atheist. You were kind of like,
correct.
well, who knows what's going on out there? I'm not gonna, tell anybody they're wrong. I'm just listening with an open
That's
ear. Is
correct,
that
Kevin.
kind of where you were at? Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct, Kevin. I was more of agnostic. Uh, I guess I was never really an atheist. Perhaps when I was very, very young, I was, prior to meeting that very first Christian teenager. Um, but after that, I became much more of an agnostic until I gave my life at the age of about, 15 years ago. Yeah, 15 years ago, I gave my life.
What was it? What was it that caused you to finally make that decision to turn your life over to Christ?
Well, this will put a smile on your face, Kevin. I was commenting in the university, as I said, that I think God exists. It was misinterpreted by a staff member who was a biologist and a researcher there, and she was sort of she was stunned. She had not been raised. She was an atheistic family. Um, she thought, I don't know of any people at the university who are Christians, so she mistook my statement that I believe God exists to interpret me as a Christian.
Hmm.
And she said there are no tutors or teaching fellows and no lecturers, but here's this professor, head of department, head of research centers, who's a Christian. Something's gone wrong here. I have to help him. And so she began to ask me questions that I couldn't answer. And I said, look, just go and read the book, meaning the Bible, because that's what
So
an academic does.
you didn't tell her that you weren't a Christian. You just said, "Hey, go read the Bible."
Academics never admit they're wrong, Kevin. So,
That's
so
funny.
I gave it just read the book, and of course every academic does that when they can't answer a student, they say go read the book, meaning a
Yeah.
text. I meant the Bible, and so she did, and she came back with even more difficult questions. Well, why did God kill so many people? And I went, what? And she said, well, I said, what are you reading? And she said, well, I started at the book of Genesis, and I've been working my way through. And I went, oh, now I had learned enough about the Bible, not having read it. I said, I don't think you're supposed to start there. I think you're supposed to start in those things they call the Gospels or something. She
This
walked
is a
away.
this is a this is the strangest conversation ever.
Yeah, yeah. So these are two academics on a campus.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and uh, and so what happened was she walked away thinking, well, I was rather strange because Christians seem to read their Bible back to front. They go to the back first and then go to the front later. But that reading the book of Genesis had a big impact on her, by the way, as a biologist. It certainly helped begin to clarify a lot of things that
That's
were
amazing.
uncertain in
She
her mind.
here she took you seriously and you were kind of just joking around.
Yeah, exactly. Now, atheists, by the way, Kevin, love reading the Bible.
Hmm.
I have found that wherever I go, they want to challenge us and they'll pull scripture out wherever they can get a chance. So I often warn Christians as I speak, I hope you're reading the Bible because your atheists aren't.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyhow, she had enough of all this, and I found it difficult coming into contact with her. And so she said one day, "Take me to your church. I'm going to prove God doesn't exist." And I thought, well, I don't go to church. So I put it off for months until she got very angry and said, "Take me to your church." And I thought, oh, where do I go? And I thought, okay, there's a church down the road, a big one, and hundreds of people. So I thought, we'll go down there. We walked down there one day, went around, picked up, went down there, walked in there, and we had an academic argument basically in the middle of church because she said, "You promised to take me to a church." And I said, "This is a church." And she goes, "Where's the stained glass windows?" I said, "I don't know. It's a big modern church." She said, "Well, what's with the band on the stage? Where's the organ?" I said, "I don't know. Just sit down." She said, "Well, where's all the pews, the wooden pews? Why are all these lovely, comfortable seats?" I said, "I don't know. Just sit down." So we sat down. Neither of us remember any part of that talk. Okay. But in the end, the pastors realized there were a couple of strange characters in there who were even arguing in the middle of church in their academic voices. And so he did a calling to Christ. Lower your heads, close your eyes. She did. Guess what she did? She put her hand up, gave her
Oh
life to
my
Christ,
goodness.
and she was an atheist. And then she opened up one eye to see if I approved it, thinking I was a Christian. But when she looked across, she saw my hand was up as well. An atheist had his hand up, an agnostic had his hand up, and she again thought, "Well, you're a bit of a. Oh, I thought you were a Christian. What are you doing?" And so, interesting point there, Kevin, is an atheist took an agnostic to church without any Christian support.
That
We
is
knew
great.
nobody in there, and on that day, we both gave our lives to Christ. And she didn't annoy me anymore. So a year and a half later, I married her.
Oh my goodness. What a crazy story. That is amazing.
She now loves doing ministry with women, particularly women's identity, and particularly with Christian schools as well. And I had to leave university, of course, after that decision, and eventually connect with Creation Ministries International. And so we've now completely
What a
different lives.
wonderful story. That is the first time I've ever heard a testimony like that.
It's unusual. It's unusual. People thought prior to that, as my wife Julie did, that I might have been a Christian, but I had not given my life to Christ. I was
Hmm.
agnostic, weakening, willing to go along to churches, willing to talk and do things, but in reality, I was avoiding it as much as possible. I was just climbing the ladder and as far as I could
Yeah.
in the
So
world I
what
was in.
happened? What happened in that church service that because you said, you don't even remember the message that was shared. But was it just was for you at this point, was it an intellectual acceptance of the reality of the Bible, or was it something going on? I mean, it's both, right?
Yeah,
But what
it's
was
both.
happening inside of you?
It was both, but it was no longer an academic intellectual element. It was a spiritual element.
Hmm.
That's what hit me. It's what hit my wife Julie as well. And so for both of us, we came out of there stunned. We would talk much more about the academic side of it later, when she said that day everything changed in her mind, and she suddenly realized evolution never occurred because she had read the Bible. She had been challenged in a way that I'd been challenged, that don't accept these paradigms as correct, as truth. And on
Yeah,
that day, we heard the truth. Whatever that message was, we heard it, and we were stunned. And so I guess it was an emotional journey that day. We were
yeah.
completely overwhelmed, and both gave our lives to Christ. And
Wow, that is a
that
wonderful story.
that changed everything. So I do actually probe some churches when I visit them and just say, so if an atheist can bring agnostic into church. How are you guys going?
That is great. I love it. What a message. Um, so for those of you listening, my guest is Dr. Ron Neller, and he's with Creation Ministries International, creation.com. They have over 15,000 articles. I've used them numerous times, and wonderful, wonderful scientists who love the Lord and have done a lot of diligent research that is useful for touching people's hearts, opening their minds, and getting them to look at the actual evidence, because the evidence is for Christianity, not against it. So Dr. Neller, what are you involved in now as far as what are the things that you're interested in that pertain to things like the flood and so forth? Because I know you do research, is that correct?
Correct. As Creation Ministries International, I'm a writer and a speaker. And in the writing, I do like to look at, I still continue to do research. Part of what I did when I first joined Creation Ministries was to go back over my own research that I had interpreted in other ways. And that's opened up a whole lot of doors.
Wow.
So the Underfit Rivers, I wrote as an underfit river, according to my case study. But now I've got an article in our journal, submitted it there. So I've rewritten and looked at a whole lot of other evidence. I've visited many other sites, done all that. Same with fossil studies, same with other topics. What I've done is I've gone back over even some of the work I did in marine science in China, off the shore of Hong Kong. That clearly points to a global flood as well. At the time, I didn't see it so much, but I do now. And so
Okay,
what I've
wait.
been doing is mapping it
So
all.
in Hong Kong, you said what points to the global flood?
When you look at, we did drilling in the sea floor,
Yeah.
and essentially what we found was a sequence of sediments that reflects one basic sequence, where the top is the marine, but prior to that are floodplains when the sea level was lower, and so on. You don't see multiple evidences of the sea level going up and down. You only see one there. So it matches the biblical point of view and the scientific point of view from Creation Ministries, that the global flood was followed by an ice age, because the tumultuous turmoil in the atmosphere and the ocean temperatures and so on did lead to a short ice age, which then obviously affected parts of North America, Finland, and others, which I inspected. But the evidence offshore, even in Hong Kong, points to that same conclusion, that there was a flood and a single ice age as well. The sea level. You could even see the original channels underwater, buried deep underwater, from the rivers that flowed through off the shore of China and Hong Kong.
And then the oceans rose after the flood as the ice melted?
Yes, so we had the sea level rise basically to where it was today originally, straight after the flood as it melted. Then it kicked into an ice age of short duration. We're talking only probably in the order of about 500 to 700 years, which is interesting. In the book of Job, he refers to the ice up in the mountains, where we do know there was ice evident during the flood. And then the sea level rose back up again, roughly to where it is today. And the evidence of all that sea level, a singular sea level, is quite strong. So it all matches into a global flood. Once again, it was the after effects of the flood.
So would you say, was there one main, because we talked about the unfit rivers, was there one main evidence for you that was overwhelmingly compelling, or was it just the accumulation of data that ended up causing you to believe that?
It was both, Kevin. It was both. There was accumulation because I was working in so many areas, so many locations, with so many scientists from so many different disciplines. I kept seeing patterns running through this. That was one. I guess the one that impacted me quite significantly was the formation of fossils, because to create fossils, you need rapid and deep sedimentation, the piling up of sediment on top of them. And it has to be fairly deep in order to compact. It also has to be deep to make it an anoxic environment lacking in oxygen. So you've got to look at it 50 centimeters or so. But as I was traveling the world, I was measuring sediment rates of transfer all around the world, whether it was in Finland or Peru. And what I found is that despite the media and despite our environmental claims, the actual amount of sediment going out into the world is minimal. And no matter where I looked around the world, I could not find enough sediment that I would even find that could fossilize cockroaches on a grand scale, let alone a T-Rex.
Yeah.
To give you one example, the majority of fossils are marine origin, about 95% or so about of marine origin. Yet the deposition of sediment in the oceans that we've been monitoring for years is in the order of about 50 millimeters over 1,000 years. Now, that's 0.05 millimeters per year. And you know that because when you look at sunken ships, there's no sediment on top of them.
Mm.
So how do you explain 95% of the world's fossils when the oceans don't get the sediment deposited in them at the rate and the depth that you need to compact and speedily cover to protect it from predation? Even when you come close to shore, such as off the Columbia, the Magdalena River, even there, and that's a dirty river, the depth of sedimentation yearly is 2 to 3 centimeters. Wow. You can't get very excited about that from a fossil point of view. You can get
Yeah.
excited from an environmental point of view, but not from a fossil point of view. You need more than tens of centimeters. You need meters.
So this
Where
information to me, yeah, yeah, exactly. This information to me seems overwhelmingly obvious. And it's interesting because a while back, there was a show that came on Netflix where a guy who's not really a scientist, he's more of a journalist. I don't know if you saw this. He was talking about ancient apocalypses, and he actually references all the flood legends all over the world. And he
hmm,
he comes to the conclusion that there was most definitely a worldwide flood. He's not even a Christian. Um, but I just find it interesting that this evidence seems to be mounting more and more and more and more. And I mean, it seems like you could only ignore it for so long before you finally just have to go, okay, I give. But do you feel like this information is making headway in any sense, whether that's, in universities or out in the public or wherever? Do you feel like it's making an impact?
I think it will in time, but it's classic to any new idea in science. And I think a philosopher named Khan spoke about that we can walk along one track, and when we come to a wall, we don't quite know what to do with it. We're not going to go up the wall. We're going to turn back and continue in our own merry journey on the platform we're currently on. And that has
Mm.
been shown time and time again in science. We had one Australian scientist who was a medic looking at ulcers, duodenal ulcers, and so on. He determined it was bacteria, but 300 people, close to 300 people at a conference, laughed and walked out on him. He actually had to infect himself with the ulcer to actually, or the bacteria, to actually then cure himself and identify it. That's how silly it got to. He was awarded in the end a Nobel Award for his research, but it took him 30 years. And so there is an automatic resistance to new
Yeah.
ideas. But you are right, there is an incredible amount of evidence. Doesn't matter whether it's a fossil, whether it's a landscape, whether it's a flood, whether it's an ice age, it is overwhelmingly now pointing towards a global flood.
Mm.
Uh, so
Well,
we do find more people starting to think about it, but we haven't yet crossed that line.
yep, yep. Well, I really appreciate all the work you've done and everything you're doing. It's wonderful. And really appreciate Creation Ministries. What you guys have done is fantastic and a huge blessing to so many people. So thanks for all you're doing.
My pleasure, Kevin. Always my pleasure.
And hopefully we can have, Creation Ministries. I know you guys travel around and speak. Do you ever get over to the States to speak over here?
I will probably be over to the States, not necessarily speak, but I will, if I'm there, I will speak if
Yeah.
opportunities. I know a couple of
Yeah.
pastors there who would love me to speak if I'm touring the area.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'll give up my Sundays and come and speak.
if you're in California, let me know.
I
So,
will do. Been there
yeah,
before.
yeah,
Enjoyed it.
would
Of
love
course,
to
I went
have
to
you out.
Disneyland.
At Disneyland, yeah. It's too crowded.
Of course.
Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you for sharing that testimony too. That's a wonderful story. I'm gonna hold on to that one and share it with my students. That's fantastic. And
Thank you, Kevin.
for those of you listening, please reach out, creation.com. If you're interested in talking to Dr. Neller himself, I'm sure you can reach him by email and he'd be happy to give you any information or dialogue that you'd like just to chat about these issues. And we're going to have some wonderful guests coming up here very soon to talk more about these sorts of issues. I have a woman who converted out of Hinduism who's going to be on the show pretty soon, I believe next week. And then we have some other guests coming up real quick here to talk about things like the fossil record, dinosaurs, and a bunch of other evidence. So thanks for being here with us this evening. And Dr. Neller, thanks again. Look forward to having you on maybe again in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Much appreciated.
Okay. Have a great night. We'll see you next time.
When you need tires or service, count on Conover Tires, Wheels, and Service in Oceanside for a full range of affordable options and all the brands you trust. See their great customer reviews and special offers online. Hours Tuesday through Friday, 7:30 to 5:30, and Saturdays, 7:30 to 5. Call Dan and his team at 760-439-1631. Conover Tires, Wheels, and Service, 2405 Oceanside Boulevard in Oceanside, 760-439-1631.
How can you live in San Diego and miss out on enjoying the water? Fast Lane Kayaking sells popular Hobie Cat kayaks that you pedal, not paddle. That means your hands are left free for fishing and fun. Just throw these on your roof rack. They're light and they're easy to use and maintain. Just rinse them off. Try one free on a demo ride. For 36 years, Ron and Debbie Lane have served San Diego with fun, family-friendly water sports of all kinds. Learn more. FastLaneSailing.com. 619-222-0766.
Hi, this is Jason Hall, president of Team Home Loans, a branch of Synergy One Lending. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Kevin Conover for the profound impact he's had on mine and my wife's spiritual life, as well as being an incredible teacher while our kids were his students. His knowledge and passion have taught us all how important it is to be defenders of our faith. It's our honor and privilege to support Kevin and his show. It is our sincere hope and prayer that you will continue to learn to be defenders of your faith through Kevin's radio show and through his Educate for Life teachings. Thank you, Kevin, from the Hall family and Team Home Loans.
Educate for Life helps you build your life on the rock. LG Equipment helps builders build on good soil. Luke Gibson's team at LG Equipment is your local source for grading, demolition, hauling, and more. Learn about their bulk water services, from trucks to tankers to towers, at rentwatertower.com. Get your questions answered. Call LG Equipment at 619-988-0924. Learn more at lgequipment.com. 619-988-0924.